The partition of India was one of the most tragic events experienced by humanity in modern times. It is estimated 1 million people were killed and 12 million more made homeless. Painful loss of family members and loved ones to mindless violence have left the collective memories scarred on both sides of the border created by the partition. Even as we approach 75 years since this momentous event, we have never ceased to wonder and question what if. The reasons that led to the partition and its very legitimacy continue to remain highly contested. While many accuse independence leaders like Gandhi and Nehru, others lay the blame squarely on the British connivance. And yet others trace the seeds of division in the very birth of the Muslim League. The defenders of each side claim their powerlessness in the face of the inevitable partition. But was it really inevitable? To revisit and re-examine this, we have with us a panel of highly eminent and learned experts. I'm honored to state that we have with us today Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmed, who is the Professor Emeritus of Political Science at Stockholm University and Editor-in-General of the Liberal Arts and Social Sciences International Journal. We have Dr. Sucheta Mahajan, who is the Professor and former Chairperson at the Center for Historical Studies, JNU. We have Dr. Masoodashrafraja, who is Associate Professor of Postcolonial Literature and Theory at the University of North Texas, and the editor of Pakistaniaat, a journal of Pakistan studies. We have Mr. Sudheendrakulkarni, an Indian politician, socio-political activist, author, and columnist. And we have Mr. Abhijitchavda, who is a researcher and writer on topics of history and geopolitics, as well as the founder and host of a highly popular podcast, Ask Abhijit. Welcome all of you to Argumentative Indians. It's an honor to have you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
To kickstart, I would like to invite Dr. Ahmed to address the main topic of today's session. Was the partition inevitable?
No, I don't think so. I think it was a last-minute decision of the departing British Empire. And let me put the order in which this partition thing became center stage. Of course, on both sides, Hindus and Muslims, since at least the second half of the 19th century had been talking about a partition in which Hindus and Muslims will be separated from one another and given separate states. But this was confronted by the emergence of the Indian National Congress as an open party for all Indians. So this idea of a partition remained on the peripheries until about 1936-37. Then it moves center stage. And on the 22nd of March, 1940, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the president of the Muslim League, in his marathon speech, lays down what I've called the foundational basis of the ideology, the two-nation theory or ideology. On the 23rd and 24th, then there was speeches made in support of the Lahore resolution, demanding that in the northeastern and northwestern parts of the subcontinent, where Muslims were in a majority, they be separated to create Muslim states which would be independent and sovereign. Within a week, the Sikh leader, Sardar Sundar Singh Majithia of the Sikh Nationalist Party said that if the Muslims want India partitioned on the basis of religion, we will resist being included in a communal Pakistan. And we would want the non-Muslim districts of the Punjab be separated and given to a Sikh state or to India. Now we can move forward. And then the British, I have argued all along in my recent book, especially Jinnah, his successes, failures, and role in history, but even the earlier two books which are related to the partition, the Punjab, bloodied, partitioned, and cleansed, and then Pakistan, the garrison state. In all three, I've shown that the British had no plans of leading the subcontinent. In 1943, when the penultimate Viceroy, Lord Mountbatten, took over from Lord Linlithgow, Linlithgow told him that we are here for another 30 years. That would be 1973. But of course, this was a delusional statement, because the Second World War, although the Allies won it, but British economy, industry, capacity to maintain and sustain an empire in India was not possible anymore. So then they came up with the idea of the cabinet mission plan, in which a loose Indian federation with three groups which had a right every 10 years to decide whether they want to remain in it or not. And the princely states were free to decide either to join India or to Pakistan or to remain independent. That plan was rejected by the Congress on grounds that without an effective center, there was no chance that you could keep India united. Jinnah accepted that, but said that we will do everything because to ensure that we get Pakistan. If we couldn't get it today, that's our objective, ultimate objective. Then, of course, you have Mountbatten coming in March 1947. He talks to all the leaders. And then on the 3rd of June 1947, finally, a partition plan is set forth, which requires that not only that Hindu and Muslim areas of India will be separated and given to two independent dominions. Also in Bengal and Punjab, which were Muslim majority provinces, the two assemblies split into two. Hindu and Muslim majority districts will vote whether they wanted to keep their provinces united and part of Pakistan or give to India. And if they decide in favor of partition, then those areas will be given to India. Earlier, in April 1947, in Bengal, an idea was floated that, and it was, I think, Sarad Bose and Sohrawardi saying, we want to keep Bengal united. That was then challenged by Mr. Mukherjee of the Hindu Mahasabha and then supported by the Congress. So if you look at the order in which this demand for partition actually emerged from one to another, then it is as late as 3 June 1947, and then the voting in the two assemblies on the 20th June and 23rd June in favor of partition. And then the partition, the transfer of power was so badly organized that ultimately, as you gave the figure, 1 million killed. And according to my studies, 14 to 15 million people uprooted to cross the Red Cliff line in search of safe havens. So the whole idea that India will be partitioned and partitioned in this way is a very, very late arrival. Just before I finish, I should mention a very important role played by the British Army. On the 12th of May 1946, the Supreme Commander in the subcontinent, Field Marshal Auchinleck, had to write a memorandum, should there be Pakistan or not? And he concluded, no, if we have Pakistan, we will have a partitioned India, and that would be an invitation to the Soviet Union to march in, because India wouldn't have the British Indian Army, its prize creation to defend India. Then on the 12th of May 1947, there is a complete 100% about turn. And the three heads of the British Armed Forces, the hero of the Second World War, Field Marshal Montgomery, and some people from the Colonial Office prepare a memorandum saying that Mr. Jinnah is willing to join the Commonwealth. We should ask for Karachi port facilities, Pakistan airfields, and Muslim manpower to be at the disposal of the British. whereas Hindustan may go its own way because they did not trust Nehru and the left wing of the Congress who were going to come to maybe would lead India forward. So for me, the partition of India is a very, very, very late arrival on the, on the table. And that's it. So I'll finish here.
Thank you, sir. So, would it be fair to say that you think partition was not inevitable until very late in the game, let's say around by the time the cabinet mission failed? And you think what made it ultimately inevitable was the British realization that their interests were better served by a divided India post their exit, which had to happen since they had been weakened.
Absolutely.
But to me, what's interesting is that you have highlighted that British saw that Pakistan would be an ally, whereas they did not trust Nehru, which is quite interesting given in contemporary discourse in India, Nehru has been often criticized for being too Anglophile and too much of a collaborator, that somebody that British like working for. So it's interesting to get a very different perspective on that. I would are you?
I mean, I can
Dr. Mahajan,
go ahead.
Otherwise, okay,
I mean,
back, and then we move on to Dr. Raja.
You want me to? So, thank you. It's an honor to be with all the panelists, and
Sure.
of course, I'm familiar with Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmed's work. I've read it very carefully. So, I mean, yes, I mean, I agree with Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmed that it wasn't, the moment you invoke the term inevitability, it becomes natural. Nothing is natural in history. History changes because of agential acts of collectives and individuals. So it goes without saying. Now, I'm not a historian and I'm not a political scientist. I'm a literary scholar. So what we lack is the substantive knowledge of history and a clear understanding of the political theory. But where we have an advantage is to read language at its poetic level, right? Where language no longer sometimes means what it says. So I agree with that. But I think I would like to argue here that to attribute the entire project of partition to Britain, it's interesting. There are historical facts behind it, but then we assume that there were two passive entities, right? The Indian National Congress and Muslim League, and that upon those passive entities were overwritten the text of the British Empire. I think we need to give some credit to the people who were actually agitating for the partition or not, right? And we need to create that room there, the acts of agency by people on opposing sides of it. But I agree with Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmed that there was nothing inevitable about it. Just like, I have all the transfer documents sitting here, and here are like 4 or 5, 6 books that came out in the 1940s on the question. Everyone was talking about and writing about the partition from 1940 till 1946. I mean, I think the best book is Rajendra Parshad's book on division of India. So that's where I will stop. I mean, sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Raja. Can we let's move on. Dr. Sucheta Mahajan, can you we can't hear you, ma'am. You need to unmute yourself. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, sorry. I said the very idea of inevitability in history, I have a problem with that, because I think it then precludes any possibility of agency on the part of historical actors. I mean, if something is inevitable, then, there's nothing more to it. But coming to an empirical level and coming to India and coming to the partition, the whole notion of inevitability is predicated upon a colonial idea, a colonial construction, namely that Hindus and Muslims that there were irreconcilable differences between the two from time immemorial. And it was these differences which made India a zone of warring groups, warring tribes, if you like. And the British, the colonial regime, took the credit for unifying India, which is, as I said, totally a colonial construction. There is nothing that we accept in that. So there is a politics to this whole idea of inevitability of partition, which I said comes around this theory of irreconcilable differences. Now, you know, I'm always reminded when we talk about inevitability of a couple who has separated, who's got divorced, and they are sitting back at some point in time separately, and they are looking back to a point to identify that moment when it was clear that the love that was there earlier wasn't there anymore. And I think the writing on partition is because partition has been so unhappy a legacy for our two countries, Pakistan and India, there is a sense of regret. I come from a refugee family myself. My parents were in Lahore and they, made the trudge across the border to Delhi. And, we grew up in a refugee colony. So that sense of loss is very much there and looking back. And so, as I said, this idea of inevitability is also linked to this idea of what Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed hinted at, that there is no such thing. That is a point of no return. And it's interesting that in the historical writings on partition, that there is an attempt to identify such a point. What I also call the ifs of history. So 1937, if only there had been a coalition in UP, partition wouldn't have happened. Or 1946, if Congress had accepted the cabinet mission plan, maybe we could have avoided partition. So this idea of identifying that point of no return is, I said, also very much linked with this whole idea of inevitability, which I think is an exercise which is best not undertaken because it doesn't really get us anywhere. Yes, I'm also of the opinion that what we can best do here is to take a quick look at the processes which unfolded, in those last years leading up to 15th August 1947. What were those? I'm not talking about landmarks, but the processes. And here I think there's no doubt in my mind that we first need to look at it, even however old-fashioned or hackneyed we may, people today call it. But the first process we need to look at is very clearly the divide and rule policy of the colonial government. And here I'm underlining that aspect, which has earlier also been highlighted, which is that at no point before 1946 did the British think of quitting India. It's only in that speech made by the Secretary of State on 1st January 1946, where they say that we are planning to leave India in the coming few years. There's no date yet. So the British were not thinking of wrapping up their rule, not at all. Now, as far as we look at the Jinnah is concerned, now Jinnah certainly made that demand for Pakistan and he meant it. I don't buy the Ayesha Jalal argument at all, that it was a kite flown and a bargaining counter. He didn't really want it. No. I think we are doing disservice to Jinnah and to the people of Pakistan, I think more also, where if we say that no, they didn't want it. It was something which was thrust on them. But it would interest our audience to know that Pakistan was not taken seriously either by the British or by the Congress for a very long time. If you look at the newspapers around 1940, you will find hardly any discussion on them. When Cripps mission comes, there is some talk about smuggling in Pakistan through the back door, the talk about self-determination of provinces. CR formula, again, a little bit. When Gandhi walks up the hill, Malabar Hill, to Jinnah's house in the famous Gandhi Jinnah talks, Pakistan is not being talked about. Gandhi is talking about rights of Muslims, and Gandhiji is offering that as an elder brother, the Hindus should be generous towards the Muslims. Now, whether we like that analogy or not is a different matter. But the Congress responsibility for partition, I would say, does not lie in what today very often, it's put at the door of Nehru and Patel. They were tired, they had been in jails, they wanted power. I think that's we are barking up the wrong tree. Very clearly, I think that the Congress weakness was that they did not give a strong ideological fight to the Muslim League. They never took it seriously. Even as late as the elections of 1946, they were not taking it seriously. When the League made it a referendum almost for Pakistan, the Congress was still fighting on the platform of anti-imperialism. So I think they should have waged an ideological struggle. And last of all, I think that Gandhiji, again, there's so much about how Gandhi could have stopped partition. He was very clear about it. There's a beautiful sentence that he said when N.K. Bose, who was his interpreter, said to him that, why don't you do something? You can stop what's happening. And he said, I don't have any magic wand by which I do something. He said, the analogy was in Hindi, kumhar. He said, I am a potter. He said, I just take the clay that is there. And by that, he meant the people. He said, I take the clay that is there and I give it a shape. But today I look around me and I don't find any sign of that. And he says, when I look around, I find that people are communalized. And that's where the real weakness in India lay eventually. Much after the role of the British and what Jinnah did, it was that a time came in the summer of 1947 when the people had got communalized. Gandhiji said, don't blame the Muslims. He said, the Hindu and the Khalsa wanted it. I'll stop at that right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mahajan. On that note about Gandhi, that I think he also is quoted as saying that partition would happen over my dead body or my coffin box. So he vehemently opposed Gandhi. But there is a view out there that while his words opposed partition, his actions didn't keep up with those words. I'll bring Abhijitchavda on this one, as he's been fairly vocal on this topic.
Thank you so much. Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me for this discussion. And it's a great honor to be in the company of such august scholars. Great to be with you all. So like you said, I've been vocal about this. And I see history as, I don't see history as a collection of quotes. I don't see history as something that you study chronologically. I see history as something that is happening in real time. And at any given point in time, there's a number of forces that's acting on a particular culture, society, geographical region. For instance, these forces could be internal forces, external forces, political forces, geopolitical forces, and all that. Let's look at Afghanistan. What happened in the past 20 years? The Americans came in 2001, and the geopolitical climate was very different. Today, it's very different when they have left. So the forces that are at play are always changing. So if we look at the past 200 years of India's history, let's begin with the time when the British became a major player after the Anglo-Maratha Wars. So by the 1750s, the Marathas had essentially reconquered India from the Mughals. They had established a large empire, and then the British became a major player. They started capturing territory, which gave them political power. They started having their own militias, their own army, which gave them political power and control over the country. And eventually, they captured the trade, they monopolized the trade, they destroyed the local industries. And all of this gave them complete control over the country, not just control over the land, but the control over the industries. And then they created, in the late 19th century, this political party to supposedly shepherd in a moderate way the Indian political struggle for independence, the Congress Party, which is a creation of the British. And as we can see, all the leaders in the Congress Party were all English educated Anglophiles, with the exception of one or two people like Mr. Patel, Sardar Patel. So political power, it comes from actual street power. If you need to have an army, you need to have a militia, you need to have complete control. It's about these networks of control and power. So that's how the British established power over India, and that's how they consolidated it. In the early 20th century, the only major political power in India was the British Empire. And the Muslim League and the Congress Party, they did not have any real political power. Popularity and power are completely different things. Power comes from the barrel of a gun, like Mao Zedong said. It also comes from the blade of a sword. And the more people you have at your disposal who will obey you unquestioningly, the more power you have. And that's what the British had. They had the British Indian Army, and they had these political outfits at their disposal. The Congress Party and even the Muslim League is to some extent their creation. And it's ironical that Jinnah opposed the creation of the Muslim League. He was a secularist. He was in favor of Hindu-Muslim unity and brotherhood and a unified India. So these are the powers, the forces that were at play in India, and there is no inevitability about partition. When you have a subcontinent-sized geography such as India with so much plurality and diversity, then you're going to have lots of different opinions, lots of different agendas. And a geography such as India, it needs a very towering leader to unify it and take it together. And the last such leader who had a chance of doing that was Subhash Chandra Bose. And once Subhash Chandra Bose was ousted and made irrelevant, at that time, in my opinion, partition became inevitable. Because if you look at Subhash Chandra Bose and his Indian National Army, you had Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Buddhists, and who and whatnot, who fought together, lived together, bled together, and died together for a free, united India. Look at Habibur Rahman, his right-hand man, so to say. He fought for India, fought for a free, united India. And once Subhash Chandra Bose was sidelined, made marginalized, that's when Habibur Rahman saw that people like Mr. Gandhi and Mr. Nehru were going to take India in a direction that he did not agree with. That was not his vision of India. And therefore, he found it better to go with the new country of Pakistan, because that was more in line with the kind of vision that he had. But so it's all about leadership. If you have the right leader, even today, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, everybody would unite, with the right kind of leadership. It is always leadership that is critical in these matters. India in the past, let's say 500,000 years, hasn't had the kind of one leader who can unify the country. And that's what India has always lacked. So when Mr. Bose was sidelined by the forces at play, by the powers, that's when partition became inevitable. And like I said, geopolitical agendas change. When the Americans came into Afghanistan, they had a totally different agenda. And when they have left today, they have a different agenda because the world has changed. And similarly, in the early 20th century, the world was different. After the Second World War, the British were near bankrupt and they were no longer in a position to hold on to India. And therefore, they engineered an exit strategy that was beneficial towards them. They had geopolitical interests in the Middle East, in the Gulf region, oil and all that. And therefore, they desired to have a part of India that was very strongly pro-Britain, very strongly pro-West, and that was Pakistan. So in a nutshell, that is why they engineered partition. It was all a geopolitical game, and it became inevitable when the last true Indian resistance in the form of Subhash Chandra Bose was defeated. So that's when partition became inevitable, in my opinion. Thank you.
May I also, other
Thanks,
speakers?
Abhijit. I want to bring you, Mr. Raja, just very quickly, two observations which we can cover later in the debate. One thing is what struck to me, and I would like to understand more from you, is you think Gandhi was a great, powerful enough leader to prevent partition, but you think, but at another time you said we lacked strong leadership because after Bose had gone. So it seems like a bit of a contradiction. And then there is another point which which every speaker so far has mentioned, that it was in Britain's interest for this to be divided, but that's not a universal view. I would just like to quote Professor Anita Inder Singh. She wrote, the British favored a transfer of power to a united India, which would keep the royal army undivided and be to the greatest advantage to them strategically. If Nehru and Jinnah both were anglicized barristers from London, who the British loved engaging with, why would they want the country to get divided? They could have cooperated with either of them in a post-independence future. Once again, first, Dr. Raja, you wanted to make a point, and then we get to Ishtiaq Ahmed, but I want to move on to Dr.
May I answer the question? May I answer the points quickly? May I quickly respond?
Okay, but keep it short because I wanted to come back to you. Of course,
certainly, yes. So, first of all, I have never said that Mr. Gandhi was a powerful leader. He was made popular via various means, but popularity is not leadership.
Do you think he could have prevented the partition?
No, he could not.
Happening?
No, he could not have prevented partition. He was not it was not his intention to prevent partition. Secondly, quotes don't matter. What people say don't matter. What
Abhijit,
matters.
You didn't say, sorry, Abhijit, just you're saying it was not his intention. That's not the question. Do you think if he said always that he does not want partition, if he was true to his word, could he have stopped partition? That was the question.
It was never his agenda to stop the partition. He was a British agent. He never wanted that. Doesn't matter what words he said. He said,
but let's not go into
conspiracy
theories.
Nothing to stop it.
Let's just stick to the point. Could he have, let's assume for a minute, he wanted to. Could he have done it?
No, he could not have. If the British did not want partition, if the British wanted a partition, Gandhi could not have opposed it. And the British
so you lay all the power with the British. Okay,
absolutely.
Agreed. And then the other point, you think British definitely wanted India to be divided?
Yes, absolutely. It doesn't matter what they said, what they did matters. Military commanders, some of them may have been against partition, but the politicians are the ones who were truly in power. The military is answerable and it takes orders from the politicians, and these are the people who control the geopolitical direction in which a country goes. So that's the short.
So you raised a lot of points on which everybody wants to counter. I think come in on different points, but I want to give an opportunity to Mr. Sudheendrakulkarni first. Ma'am, Sucheta Mahajan, ma'am, we'll come to you right after. Let Mr. Kulkarni come in and with his opening comments.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this discussion. Let me begin by conveying my greetings to all the people of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh on the occasion of this year. That's the beginning of the 75th anniversary of India's independence. There are two ways of approaching this subject. One is looking at the past, and the other is looking at the present and the future. I'm less interested in looking at the past and more interested in looking at the present and the future, because partition is a reality. It cannot be undone. What is important now and into the future is, can we undo the negative effects of partition? And there are many negative effects, which I'll come to. Of course, it's important for us to know why partition happened, how partition happened, what were the factors that contributed to it. In my view, the first and foremost factor is the policy of divide and rule by the colonial masters. They knew that a free India and a united India would emerge as a very strong power on the world scene, which would of course overshadow the West in due course of time. So divide and rule policy of the British. Secondly, the weakness of the Indian national movement. It has been referred to by Dr. Mahajan earlier, the weakness of the people. We were not united enough throughout the course of the freedom movement, and those weaknesses really manifested in the last decade of the freedom movement. The weaknesses due to different perceptions and perspectives of the elite of the Muslim community and the Hindu community. The third factor is the obduracy of Jinnah and the Muslim League. In the final years of the freedom movement, they took to some absolutely unpardonable acts, such as a direct action in Bengal, which led to mass killings on a horrendous scale. And that made many people in the Congress believe that now it is not possible to continue as a united nation. They feared civil war, and therefore the commitment to unity of the nation somehow became weaker in the Congress party. And of course, a very important factor that led to partition and the kind of partition that actually happened was the partition of Punjab. Subsequently, the decision to divide Bengal too. Had Punjab remained united and yet partition happened, perhaps the history of India would have been very different. But as Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed has said in this discussion, and of course he has argued with meticulous research in his book, The Punjab Bloodied, Partitioned and Cleansed, I think the game was lost when Punjab, or the leaders of Punjab on both sides, on the Muslim side as well as the Hindu and Sikh side, decided to divide the province. And last factor is the absolutely irresponsible role that the British played in the final months of India's freedom movement. The unplanned, hasty exit, something that we can see even in the way the Americans left Afghanistan in total chaos. What happened in India was a chaos of a much, much bigger scale, leading to bloodshed and mass migration, the largest mass migration in human history. It is best captured by Stanley Wolpert's book, Shameful Flight. In my opinion, there were efforts right through the 20th century to somehow strengthen Hindu-Muslim unity and thereby make India both free and keep it united. A landmark effort in this direction was the Tilak-Jinnah Pact in Lucknow in 1916, when the two parties, it's remarkable that the Congress and the Muslim League held their annual sessions in the same city, almost side by side, and with a great show of camaraderie and unity. Now, had the spirit of the Lucknow Pact been kept intact, perhaps things would have been different. The next landmark effort to keep India united was the Gandhi Jinnah talks in 1944, September 1944, when at Gandhiji's own initiative, he went to Jinnah's house at Malabar Hill in Bombay, and for 18 continuous days, they held talks. And I'm really aghast when one of the panelists said that Mahatma Gandhi was a British agent. It shows utter ignorance of India's history. Mahatma Gandhi made very sincere efforts to prevent partition, or at least the kind of partition that ultimately happened. Let me quote a few lines from his dialogue, his talks with Jinnah. He said, "Can you not agree to differ on the question of two nations and yet solve the problem on the basis of self-determination? The more I think of the two-nation theory, the more alarming it appears to me. I am unable to accept the proposition that the Muslims of India are a nation distinct from the rest of the inhabitants of India. Mere assertion is no proof. The consequences of accepting such a proposition are dangerous to the extreme. Once the principle is admitted, there would be no limit to the claims for cutting up India into numerous divisions, which would spell India's ruin. I have therefore suggested a way out," and this is very important. He says, "I have therefore suggested a way out to you, to Jinnah. Let there be partition if necessary, as between two brothers. If a division must there be. Let us part as brothers of a family." It happens many times that brothers separate, but still they maintain good relations. That is the kind of future Mahatma Gandhi wanted. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. But as I said, friends, what is past is past. We cannot undo it. What is important now is, can we undo the negative effects of partition? What are the negative effects? That we have left the Kashmir issue unresolved. India-Pakistan relations continue to be extremely hostile.
Thank you,
In
sir.
Pakistan, democracy has almost become non-existent or become subservient to military rule. And in India itself, we are seeing once again a certain polarization of Hindu-Muslim on Hindu-Muslim lines. And as a result, the whole of South Asia, the largest, the most populous region in the world, 1.7 billion people. It is today the least integrated. It is home to the largest number of poor people. And we can't prevent, just look at Afghanistan. Afghanistan is part of civilizational family. And we have taken absolutely no role in preventing the disaster that happened in the last 40 years in Afghanistan. And therefore, my final submission is that this discussion should not be an academic discussion on what happened, whether it was inevitable or not. What is important is that we must prevent such things happening again, and we must create strong unity within India as well as strong unity in all of South Asia, the core of which is India-Pakistan normalization brought about by Hindu-Muslim harmonization. Thank you.
Okay, so may I...
Just one second, sir. Just very quick point. You mentioned British divide and rule policy, as was already mentioned several times before, but that policy was not devised when Britain was planning to exit. That was a policy they had been using for over a century already. And so my question is, at this point when they were looking to exit, was it still possible that the partition could have been prevented, or by that time the relations had soured so much that it just had to happen one way or another? And second thing, you mentioned that Congress had given up and they just had accepted partition as with. Also, Dr. Sucheta Mahajan had said that if Congress had put up a stronger ideological fight to the Muslim League, this could have been prevented. Do you agree with that?
No, I'll make very brief points. The second question first. The Congress commitment to keeping India united became weak in the final years of the freedom movement, and it is best captured by Dr. Ram Manohar Lohiya's excellent book, The Guilty Men of Partition. And Lohia says how it was only Mahatma Gandhi and then Abul Kalam Azad, only these two leaders stood firmly against partition almost till the very end.
May I intervene here? I mean,
let him finish, and then we'll come to Dr. Raja, and then we'll come to Dr. Ahmed, and then Sucheta Mahajan, please.
Then the first
question. Yes, so please keep it brief.
You see, I agree with you that the British idea of divide and rule did not take birth in the final stages of India's freedom movement. Not at all. They were colonialists. They were foreigners. They had colonized India, and they knew that their colonial rule would come to an end someday. So right from the beginning, we see, right from 1857, their agenda was to divide Hindus and Muslims. There may have been ups and downs, but it was a consistent policy to keep Indian society divided so that ultimately Indian nation would be divided.
Correct. And they brought this view that political representation should be based on religion. Let me get Dr. Masood Raja on this.
Okay, so I agree with your point that we should look towards the future, because I think that's a place of more possibilities. But I mean, so simply the divide and rule policy, first of all, it happens like through acts of the British. Like my reading of post 1857 was that the Muslim elite felt their very existence threatened by the British, not by the Hindus. Okay, and I accounted for it in my book in terms of reading, you know, Asbab-e Bagawat-e-Hind and all. So to imagine the Indian freedom movement in universal terms, I think is a big mistake that all of us make. It was never a universalist view of independence, because Muslims aligned themselves with the British as a way of survival. So the Muslim elite, 1858, 1859, are writing themselves literally into the British hegemonic project. The only holdouts are the ulama of Deoband, right? They are the ones who say we are going to withdraw from that, and that's historically recorded. Secondly, so my idea is that by 1858, 1880s, the idea of Muslim exceptionalism in their treatment by the British had already taken shape, right? It may not have been a political identity, but Muslim elite felt that their existential identity is under threat, and they need to develop a language of loyalism, right? So that's what we ought to keep in mind. Going to the future, I mean, I live in United States of America, right? We have students from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. If anywhere in the world, 2 or 3 nations have the most in common to build a common future, maybe not as unified nations, but as a confederacy or regional confederacy, I think we have that possibility in terms of culture, in terms of heritage, and that you, me, and everyone else, we should be working towards it as scholars and as intellectuals. And that would be a worthy goal. But it's not going to work if we keep blaming each other, right? If Pakistanis keep blaming the Indians and Gandhiji, right, and that's not going to work.
Dr. Ahmed, he wanted to make a point. Yes, sir, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. You know, when you say 1 or 2 or 3 minutes to make your presentation, I take it very seriously. And then I see all the speakers taking their time to say what they want to, and that's a bit unfair. I agree entirely with Dr. Raja that it was the Muslim elite which felt threatened, which felt dislodged by the British taking over India from the Mughals, simple as that. But then the thing one has to add is that the separatist movement was meant to defeat the idea of democracy, of power sharing, of all communities uniting their ranks to get rid of the British. So I don't see that very logical that the power which threatens you is the one that you become loyal to, and you deny the loyalty due to all other Indians in the subcontinent who may want to create a free democratic India. So I think that's where we disagree, because the consequences have been disastrous. The separatist movement is based on the real, imagined, contrived fear of a permanent Hindu domination over Muslims. And I have shown, if people have, I don't know how many have read my book on Jinnah, that this was actually fabricated through sheer reputation by Jinnah, saying that Islam will be annihilated, that the Muslims will be obliterated, that when the first Indian converted to Islam, that's when the foundations of Pakistan were laid. So these are not things which the run-of-the-mill ulama or some mad Pakistani says. These are words of Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He demonized, dehumanized Hindus. Of course, the caste system is evil, but that's not the only thing which was true about Hindus. There was their ability to assimilate and to accommodate a lot of religions, and Jinnah was fully aware of that. So what I think is problematic is that if the elite felt this way, actually Sir Syed, I've recently done a video on where he's so contemptuous of the ordinary Muslims, the converts, for example, saying that would you like an Kamzat Muslim getting a BA or MA and having a position of authority and then telling us what to do? Would you accept it? And the Muslim Ashrafia then cheered him. No, no, no. So that's the attitude that Sir Syed and his followers, and Jinnah took it very late, by the way. To his defense, he had been an Indian nationalist. I have said he was a Muslim communitarian seeking some sort of power sharing within a very loose federation, although I think it was a problematic position he took. People have not talked about the real effort of the Congress to sit together, brainwash, brainstorm, and then come with the Motilal Nehru report. It's a fantastic report for accommodating the federal nature of India and yet having an effective center to run that India. Because of the mosaic of castes, religions, cults, sects, you needed a strong government on education, on development, and so many other things. So the Congress was absolutely justified in saying, we want a united federal India, but with a strong center, which the Muslim League rejected. And then if we were to talk about what Pakistan ultimately Jinnah created, it was 100 times more centralized than India ever has been. So Jinnah used all those arguments to justify the division of India, using religion, using caste, using the fact that the moneylender happened to be a Hindu. I mean, all these things were done deliberately, and the result is the partition. So I don't have an idea of a passivity of the political actors, not at all. I find them very active. Coming to the defense of the Congress or to their stupidity, they were for 3 years at a very critical part of history, sitting in jail, Quit India movement. So how could they come out in June 1945 and start campaigning on a positive note or on a confident note the elections which were called? So Congress, by going to jail through the Quit India movement, really enabled the Muslim League to make a breakthrough. Day in and day out, Jinnah would tell Muslims that the only way that Islam can be saved is that we create a strong Pakistan. And if the Hindus gave any trouble to the Muslims in the minority areas, then we are responsible to take military action. This is all given in my Jinnah book. It's called the hostage theory. That,
yeah, but you're at,
what I'm trying to say then is that the partition was not inevitable, but it was definitely made possible by the very strong, determined effort of Muhammad Ali Jinnah and the Muslim League. That factor has to be brought in.
I mean, that's
thank you, sir. As a follow,
Pakistanis all the time.
Sorry?
Dr. Ajal, I want to go to Dr. Mahajan 1 second.
I can't hear him. I don't want to hear Dr. Raja. Yes.
What I'm saying is, Dr. Saab, that is the national narrative in Pakistan, that Muhammad Ali Jinnah single-handedly created Pakistan. And in
no,
that,
but no. Let me tell you, Raja Saab, the narrative is exactly what you are saying, but I'm saying he did it because he was hands in glove with the British. Had the British not backed him, he had no chance of getting the partition. That's what I'm saying.
Even at the last moment when Mountbatten hands him the plan, Mountbatten knows that Jinnah doesn't have the popular following to say no, right? We know that.
I would like to take a counter view to that, just for the sake of it. There is an argument that had the Congress really wanted to avoid it, yes, we all love to put it squarely with Jinnah, but had the Congress really wanted to avoid it, and they are the ones who were the advocates of democracy, why did not they ask for a universal referendum? Do you think the whole country would have ever supported the division of India? There is actually, Viceroy Lord Wavell actually wrote to Lord Pethick Lawrence, Secretary of State for India, on 20th November 1945. A vote of the whole adult population or of the enfranchised population would be unlikely to provide the results that Jinnah requires.
That's right. Good. But I mean, both Congress and, let me say, even Muslim League are on record saying we want universal adult franchise. It's the British who didn't grant it. So the Congress could not have forced the British hand when the British were to decide the future of India. So this demand on them is unreasonable. Who didn't give universal adult franchise? The British didn't. And you are absolutely right. Had this been put to vote, where everybody voted on it, there was no chance of a partition. True. I mean, that conclusion is correct.
And you think the British still had that much power by the time of 1945 or 46? They still had that level of power. They had control of the army, sure, but the politics.
Absolutely. Now that's something which we, Dr. Mahajan, I, Masood, Raja, and all of us are unwilling to admit that many Indians were still wanting the British to stay on. You had the caste system oppressing Hindus by Hindus. You had Muslims oppressing their own sects. There were Christians, there were the Dalits wanting the British to stay on. And you had the
Maharajas.
Many Maharajas is one. What about the British Indian Army, which remained loyal till the very end? So people who were employed by the British wanted the British to stay on. The British could not stay on because they were living on ransom food, ration food. Their economy was smashed, and the Americans forced them to transfer power.
That's exactly what I think. The British had to leave, no matter what.
They had to leave.
Had we pushed hard, maybe we could have gotten a referendum. That's just hard to put in there. I want to bring in Dr. Mahajan. She wanted to make a point earlier. But ma'am, before you do, I want to also, I want you to address the thing that Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmed brought up, making Jinnah as sort of instrumental to bring about this strong demand. Do you agree, and this is a view which I want to bring up, that it was Gandhi's support for Khilafat movement that ultimately led to this kind of mobilization among Muslims, that Jinnah's message got such a powerful following? You want to quickly make, if you got, ma'am, you have
let
to
Dr. Mahajan respond. I believe in proper order. She has the right. And then if you give me a chance, I'll speak. I'll not speak out of turn. Okay?
No, sure. Fine. I'm sorry, Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed, that you spoke very little. We have a tendency to speak till we are asked to shut up. So
I know. But I'm trained in a different way. I'm trained to speak for just 2-3 minutes. That's all.
I know. I didn't hear it. Well, anyway, just to take up 2 points. One is, for the sake of even if one is being hackneyed, I'm repeating this again. The British responsibility for the partition of India needs to be underlying day in and day out. I think not only because of academic reasons at all, and of course there we know that so much of the scholarship which comes out of Cambridge in particular, whether you have Joya Chatterjee or you have Aisha Jalal, Niti Nair, and many others, there is a tendency to put the blame on the Indian actors.
That's right. That's right.
Particularly on the Congress and certainly on Jinnah. Now, Jinnah should not be made the villain of the piece.
No?
Jinnah was acting out of whatever were the historical compulsions, and he made a demand. He came up with a theory which suited his politics.
Yes.
When Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed is here, I'm not going to expand on that. The point is that in the last 7 years after the Pakistan demand, it's not only that the Congress is sitting in jail, Congress leaders for 3 years, and Jinnah has time to expand, of course, and he did wonderfully in Punjab and Bengal at that time. But also, this is when, right after 1945, when the leaders come out of jail and they're sent up to Shimla for the Shimla conference, Lord Wavell, the Viceroy, allows the Shimla conference to be wrecked.
Exactly.
Basically, at the door of, he allows it to be wrecked by Jinnah, who is insisting on a very simple word, which is veto power. That he has the veto. He will decide who the representative Muslims are. That is, it was not a question of whether Maulana Azad could come in or not. It was the allies of the British in Punjab, the Unionist Party, and the British wanted to reward them by giving them a seat in the Executive Council, but Jinnah said no. So it's very important. In the Cabinet Mission Plan, again, very important that all the while there was an ambiguity. They were telling Jinnah in the morning that, look, this is all about Pakistan. Compulsory grouping, and you've got your Pakistan. And then they would go and meet Jinnah. They would meet Gandhi at 4 a.m. and take a walk with him, and they would say, nahi, bap, Gandhi, no, there's no, we are not thinking of this. We want the unity of India. We have always been for the unity. So it was the British ambiguity, and I would even say that duplicity that is very much there in all these actions. And a very important point on this, which is that do notice that eventually the 3rd June, what was announced was an award. The 3rd June plan was the Mountbatten Award. It was the Partition Award. There was no signature. No Indian leader sat there and signed. Just as an aside, if you go to Shimla to the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, which is in the precincts of the old Viceregal House, the Rashtrapati Nivas, the guide will take you to a room and show you a table and say, ye table hai na, is taraf Nehru sahab baithe, is taraf Jinnah sahab baithe, aur yahan par unhone dastakat kare, partition. So I was a fellow at the institute many years ago, and I told our director that time, I said, sir, this is totally ahistorical, and we shouldn't be doing this. And he said, Sucheta, let them make some money, unless you have a story, how is history going to sell? So anyway, maybe I kept quiet. I also like a story. But about Gandhiji, I would really appeal to my friend Abhijitchavda, that what is the point of making a comment like Gandhi was an agent of the British? I don't think this
this was a horrible thing to say.
Getting us anywhere at all. He could not have been an agent of the British. He was the most stoic and the greatest freedom fighter of them all. And, we're not on that kind of social media platform where we are just taking pot shots at people. Let's not do it. This is the kind of comment which, people make about Nehru being a Muslim and, etc. was. So let's not say that. But about Gandhiji, I'm at the moment finishing a book on Gandhi it's called Gandhiji's Last Year. And it's about Noakhali and Bihar and, the whole anti-communal tours that he undertakes. And look at what that man is trying to do. Earlier, what we said was that he reaches a point where he feels that he's not getting anywhere. He's not getting anywhere with Muslims. He's not getting anywhere with Hindus. The point is not what ultimately happened. The point is what he tried to do. He cut himself away from Delhi. Nehru begged him, we need you over here. Nehru even said, look what he does. He's going around putting an, ointment on the sores on the body. He should be trying to find out a medicine which can cure the sores. But Gandhiji said no. Gandhiji had one way of looking at life. He said, as in the microcosm, so in the macrocosm. He was of the belief that if he was able to find a way out of reaching communal harmony in the villages of Noakhali, if he could heal the wounds of the Hindus there, the wounds of the Muslims of Bihar, then he could do that in the country as a whole. But as I said, by June, when he's in Delhi and he's having his evening prayer meetings, he's confessing his inability. And people are getting up and saying, look, you were the one who said partition over my dead body. And he said, yes, I said that. But when I said that, I thought I had the country with me. But now you people, the Hindu, the Khalsa, you people also want partition. So his inability, in the end, his weakness was the weakness of the people. So that is where we can look at Gandhi. It is not that I'm not at all saying that he could have prevented what happened, not at all. If there was anyone who could have prevented partition, it was the people who proposed partition and implemented it. And that was the British.
But what about the Khilafat movement? Do you think his support for Khilafat movement going back to the 1920s helped in alienating Muslims and helped in gaining support for the two-nation theory when the Muslim League proposed it?
This is a view which has been put forward, that Gandhi mixed up religion with politics. And his support to the Khilafat movement is also taken as an example of that. Now, that's not true at all. That, he took up an issue. It was also a political issue because, the Ottoman Empire was defeated and the Khalifa was defeated. And it was an issue which, of course, affected Muslims as a whole. It was a pan-Islamic issue, as it were. And yes, Hindus and Muslims did come together. Non-cooperation movement did get tied up with the Khilafat movement, but I personally don't think that there was anything to it at all, anything wrong. I think every religion, every leader speaks in the idiom of his people. When Baba Ramchandra went and talked to the peasants of Rai Bareli in 1921 in the Eka movement, he used to give analogies recite the chopais from the Ramayana of Tulsidas. And the Muslims of those areas of UP were familiar with the chopais of the Ramcharitmanas. That is the culture of that part.
When people, that would be an assumption. But that would
just one second. Many people say on the same lines that, Gandhiji used the word Ram Raj, and that was alienated people. No. People, after all, can he go and say, this is utopia? How is a peasant? बताइए आप, एक किसान जो है वो समझेगा ये बात utopia? No, he will talk in the language of the people. That's why he said Ram Raj. What you will have is Ram Raj.
I want to go to Abhijit, who I know who's going to be countering this, and obviously he's a subject of geopolitics. But before we go to Abhijit, I think Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmed wanted to make a quick comment on this point about Khilafat movement. So let's do that, sir.
Yeah, it is one of the myths fostered by people who have not gone and checked the material which is relevant to the Khilafat movement. First of all, Jinnah was part of the Muslim League delegation of 1919, which went to England to plead the case that the Ottoman Empire's territories in the Middle East, at least, should be left to them, as was promised before the war. And the Khalifa should also be allowed to continue as the spiritual head of the Muslim community. Then in 1920, there is a famous speech I have quoted in my book, where he said that first they took away our liberty, and is referring to the Rowlatt Acts, and now they are taking away our faith, which is the spoliation of the Ottoman Empire and Khilafat. These are his words. Both were on the same page. The Muslim radicals, including ulama, Deoband, who supported the Congress party. I mean, it is the same people who later on remained steadfast in support of the Congress, who came to Gandhiji and said, we need Hindu support to confront the British. So I think this was a positive, well-intentioned, well-meant input of Gandhiji to bring Hindus and Muslims together, because Muslims had been separated from the mainstream after 1909 Act, which gave them separate electorates, separating them from the rest of the population of India. And one thing more, after that, we don't see the ulama in politics at all. So if that was an event which brought them in, where are they until Jinnah brings them back in the 1945-46 election in the Punjab, Sindh, and the rest, where they give the slogans of Pakistan ka nara kya, la ilaha illallah. And these are not the Deoband Jamiyat Ulama Hind. These are the Barelvi Maulvis. And another section of Muslims.
Another sect, yeah.
Yeah. So this is absolutely without any foundation. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Abhijit.
Yeah, so let me contextualize this entire discussion by referring to an incident that took place very late in the day in 1946. So in 1946, partition was very much on the table. It was very much the agenda of everybody. And in early 1946, there was this event that shook the British Empire to its foundations. There was a 1946 Royal Indian Navy mutiny. So this event took place for just 7 days. It started in the city of Bombay, now Mumbai, when, because of the horrible treatment meted out to Indian sailors called ratings at the time, these people rebelled. The principal instigators of this mutiny were Hindus as well as Muslims. And within just 2 or 3 days, it had spread all across the Royal Navy, all across India and even Asia, in Bombay, in Karachi, in Calcutta, in the Andaman Islands, in Singapore, East Indies, and even in the Middle East. More than 78 ships rebelled against the British, and they put up 3 flags. Each ship put up 3 flags: the Indian National Congress flag, the Muslim League flag, and the Communist Party of India flag. And this happened so rapidly that there was a real chance that even the the British Indian Army would get involved in this. So the British deployed political powers. Immediately, Mr. Gandhi and Mr. Nehru, they opposed this mutiny. Mr. Jinnah also in the Indian Muslim League opposed this mutiny, and only the Communist Party stayed in favor of the mutiny. So quickly, these mutineers got demoralized. They brought down the Indian National Congress flag, the Muslim League flag, and only the Communist Party flag was flying. Then the British asked Mr. Patel to go to Bombay and parley with the mutineers. So Mr. Patel came to Bombay. He talked to the mutineers. He assured them that there would be no repercussions. Please stand down. These people then eventually, after a week or so, stood down, and they were immediately court-martialed, put to jail. So this word that was given to them was immediately, the British went against them. Now, the thing is that this mutiny caused larger actions in India. There were riots in Bombay and Karachi. The British Army had to come into the picture. More than 1,000 people were shot in Bombay, shot to death, and similar casualties took place in Karachi. And there was this real possibility that there'll be a genuine rebellion in India, a people's rebellion, and the British power will disappear overnight if the Indian army gets involved. Because the Indian army already had this discontent because of what was happening in the eastern border with the Indian National Army. So the British deployed their political power very quickly and quelled the mutiny. Now, the reason why the Congress Party and the Muslim League opposed this is because the Muslim League wanted Pakistan. Pakistan was on the agenda at the time. And the Indian National Congress wanted the handover of power to their faction, to Mr. Nehru and Mr. Gandhi. So this mutiny could have destroyed these dreams of the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League. And as you can see, they both opposed this thing because they were in favor of partition. So the thing is, the mutineers were Hindus as well as Muslims. In the Indian Subhash Chandra Bose's army, the fighters were Indians, Hindus and Muslims. So this entire This entire claim that India was communalized, it was the fault of the Indian people, that is victim blaming. It is not about communalization. It is because of poor leadership and that India was partitioned. So that is the point I would like to make.
But you're making an assumption that the leaders would have been okay with a violent way to get rid of the British. That contradicts the very.
And what is the problem with violence to get rid of oppressors? The British killed more than 100 million Indians.
But that's the policy on which Congress was able to mobilize.
So it doesn't matter. The Congress policy doesn't matter. The nation is greater than any
millions,
policy, ideology.
Millions of Indians that supported Congress, that went to listen to them, were motivated by this philosophy. When the American president writes letters to Churchill saying that you have to end this, he is motivated by the cause that Gandhi's ahimsa is creating waves, and New York Times is reporting it.
It doesn't matter what the New York Times says. It doesn't matter.
It matters because they don't go to.
It matters to some people, not to everybody.
But the mass mobilization is what creates pressure on the government.
Which mass mobilization? Where? What pressure did it create? It is the army that created pressure.
I think I should be the one arguing. But I let Ms. Dr. Ahmed to come in. And so actually, let's go with Dr. Raja, sir. We haven't had you in the conversation.
First of all, I salute Abhijit's passion, right? I mean, it's not a question of whether we, the sedate academics, are right or whether he is right. We are looking at history from two perspectives, right? Some of us believe that, okay, it was okay to sit down and ask for your freedom. Maybe that's the part of history we like. And some of us idealize the way there were nations that had to fight through blood, like look at Algeria and others. That was the way that some of us idealize, right? आप लोग हिंदुस्तान में भी हैं, हम पाकिस्तान में, every one of us calls 1857 the first rebellion, right? Because we, deep down in our minds, we idealize resistance to the oppressors. So I don't think so there is anything wrong with what you are suggesting. But my point is, apotheosizing people is not also great. I don't believe in strong leaders. That's micro-fascism, right? I don't believe Gandhi had all the answers or he was a saint or Mr. Jinnah was perfect. I mean, Gandhi, we know, was imperfect. He had political exigencies that he had to work through. Otherwise, kyun wo jaake kitab likhenge, here are the duties of the bhangi, you must do it, right? So let's keep in mind that these were human beings involved in real politics, right? And they had to develop certain personas, right? But other than that, I am with Kulkarni ji. I think we need to be thinking of a future, right? So sorry, Dr. Ishtiaq, please.
Only thing I would add is understanding of past helps us in our self-perception in the society. That's only, yes, sir. Dr. Ahmed, please go ahead.
No, the thing is, if we had this on the agenda that we'll talk about how India and Pakistan can mend their ways, then we should have devoted our time to that. If we have chosen to discuss, okay, was it inevitable or not, then it is our duty to focus on that. Staying away is not, in my opinion, a good way of taking part in today's discussion. But coming now to the possibilities of an armed revolution, I've never ever heard that a spontaneous uprising leads to the overthrow of a whole state order known as the British Empire or any government anywhere in the world. This was confined to 1 or 2 ships in Karachi and maybe another couple in Bombay, and that's all. And within 2 or 3 days, the British used overwhelming force and crushed them. That's the truth. Second, about Subhash Chandra Bose and the INA, I would like to speak a little about. Subhash Chandra Bose, why did he escape from India? He should have stayed on. If he believed that an armed revolution was possible, he should have mobilized people. He leaves India. He then goes to Russia. Russia by that time was an ally of the British in the Second World War. He then goes to Nazi Germany, knowing what the Nazis were doing, then comes to Japan, and Japan had killed 25 million Chinese, and they were in Singapore. Their record of dealing with political prisoners was awful. Many of the INA people didn't join it because they were motivated by the speeches of Subhash Chandra Bose, maybe a few. most of them wanted to escape the extreme harsh conditions which the POW in a Japanese camp had to face. And, once Pakistan and India came into being, Habibur Rahman that he names, he fought in Kashmir for Pakistan, so did Major Kiani. And on the Indian side, one of the so-called Colonel Gill, Narjan Singh Gill, he is notorious among Muslims of East Pakistan for targeting them and killing them in the hundreds and thousands, in the thousands. So these people were opportunists at all stages in life. Some of them probably were converted to this INA philosophy, but very few. So let's not dramatize INA. And I don't think Subhash Chandra Bose was all that great a leader. Bhagat Singh, he in 1929 wrote a small piece saying that Subhash Chandra Bose is a man full of enthusiasm, but he idealizes the past. It is Jawaharlal Nehru who's the revolutionary and who can lead us into the future. Bhagat Singh se bada kaun inqilabi hai. This is his judgment of Subhash Chandra Bose.
I think many people in India these days have forgotten that Bhagat Singh had a very socialist point of view as well. That sort of like erased about his ideology when he's glorified. I want to bring in Dr. Kulkarni because he wanted to make a point. And yes, sir. Mr. Kulkarni, sorry.
The title of this discussion was Partition Inevitable. And obviously, this topic requires us to look at the past. And there are scholars who have studied this in depth, and they are well placed to give a perspective on what happened in the past. I respect them. However, as I said in the beginning, partition cannot be undone. The creation of Pakistan and subsequently Bangladesh as separate sovereign nations is a reality that has to be accepted. There is going to be no Akhand Bharat. Yet, as neighbors, we have to live together. And therefore, what matters as much as the past is our duty towards the future. And here I have a suggestion to make, which I've been making on many platforms, that 2022 marks the 75th anniversary of India's independence, but also Pakistan's independence. It's Pakistan's independence as well as the creation of Pakistan. Now, this is a time, an ideal time, when India and Pakistan, as well as Bangladesh, because Bangladesh also got independence in 1947, even though it became a separate nation subsequently in 1971. So my suggestion is that this is a time when the three countries should come together. The peoples of the three countries as well as the governments of the three countries should come together and celebrate the 75th anniversary of independence from British rule jointly. Now, this joint celebration will create the enthusiasm. It will also create the necessary understanding and knowledge that at some point in time, we were together. There were differences, but we fought against foreign rule together. And therefore, let us today, there was a very good idea that was expressed earlier, that can we not come together as some kind of a confederation? Can we not make South Asia as a union on the lines of European Union? So let's think big for the future and act in that direction and make South Asia truly a land, a region of peace, prosperity, and living together as one family.
Thank you, sir. That's a very beautiful vision. I hope that materializes. I sincerely do. I'm also, because we are sort of now running towards time, I want everybody to sort of like make their concluding remarks. I want to bring in Abhijit because he wanted to make a point. Abhijit, please.
Yeah, just a very brief point. Actually, this
sure.
Indian naval mutiny, there were 78 ships that took part in this, and it was spread from Singapore all the way to the Middle East. So it is not factually correct to say that only 2 or 3 ships were involved. It was a very big uprising. It was quelled very quickly. And secondly, like Dr. Kulkarni said, that 1947 was when India got independence. We should all come together. I think that we should all definitely work together. We have absolutely nothing against the people of Pakistan, Bangladesh. We are the same people. We have come from the same heritage. The thing is, 1947 was a transfer of power. It was not really independence. It was given to us on the terms of the British. So we all need to all work together to actually decolonize ourselves and become one in some way or some form in the next 100 years or so. It's not going to happen overnight. We have too many differences, but we are ultimately the same people. We should find ways to cooperate, work together, and make it a 100-year project. Let's try to first stop fighting and start talking.
Thanks, Abhijit. That's a very nice concluding line. Can I invite you, Dr. Masoodashrafraja?
Thank you so much for inviting me and for giving me the chance to interact with such eminent people. I am on record, both in my writing and in my public statements, that India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, the entire region, we should be working towards coming together in a loose coalition, because we share so much in common. But what we have done is, for the last 75 years, we have built narratives of irreconcilability. We have built narratives of distrust. And that is where you, me, and the writers, the poets come, right? It's our job to at least imagine a future in which we could love each other, which we could be friends, right? And equals. And I would love for you to maybe organize another session sometime in the future where we explore those possibilities, right? Instead of, I know we need the past to learn from it, but the past is also the anchor to which sometimes we tie ourselves, right? So that's my hope. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the suggestion. We'll definitely work on it. Can I invite you, Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmed, for your concluding remarks?
Well, let me say I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to my colleagues and I've learned a lot from them. Abhijit and I, in the end, are great friends because we all believe in the same thing, that we are one people, we have different religions, different languages. So bloody what? We live in Europe and you have Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs living in the same area, you know, on a daily basis, associating and so on. The evidence is overwhelming that we are so much the same that keeping us apart and separate is a political project pursued by the elites. And I agree with my very dear friend, Mr. Kulkarni, that partition is there to stay. There are 3 sovereign nations on the subcontinent, and they have a right to exist as they are. We should learn from the European. I mean, I've written so much about it that when I heard my friend say this, it's the same echo. Any sensible person who has his heart in the right place would believe in that inevitability was wrong. The partition has for 75 years delayed what we are all talking about. Had it not happened, we would have picked the pieces already in 47, because 1,000 years of living together had a lot to do with accommodation and understanding one another. But 75 years later, we still have to do the same thing. So I think we are all Raja Saab, Dr. Mahajan. There are no basic differences on this. And I'm very happy and greatly honored to have taken part in this discussion. I wish India the great future, Pakistan the greatest future. It is where all my family and friends are, and indeed Bangladesh. We are all the same people. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. And we'll conclude with Dr. Sucheta Mahajan. Ma'am, please your concluding remarks for today's session.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for giving me so much time in this discussion. And I think it was amazing how everybody kept, their cool and put forward their points of view, which were all very, at some point, there was an essential agreement when it came to the view that whatever happened shouldn't have happened. I mean, everybody, that sense of regret, that sense of a loss, and that sense that, somewhere we can be together. Gandhiji said this. He did not, in 1947, when the India Independence Bill was passed. So what did he say to the people? He said, let's not legislate on it. He said, well, if the British are imposing Pakistan or partition on us, what we need to do is to keep the situation fluid, not have passports. In fact, he was planning to go to Pakistan in January 1948 after his fast intervened. And he said, well, I dare anyone to ask me for a passport. He also said something very interesting, which I'll end with, which I think is important for us today. He said that, it's not about boundaries. If we don't accept partition in our hearts, then a time will come, then we will be able to reverse it. And that is, I think, what we are all talking about when we talk about a confederacy, when we talk about, I would say, let's not even go in that direction right now. It's too early. 20 years ago, there was some possibility. But right now, with the governments being the way they are, all quite, hard-nosed and hawkish kind of governments that we have, very unlikely that we are going to have a confederation. But something loose, something which is based on people to people, which builds on the love that the people have towards each other, the people of Punjab, the people of Bengal, they may be Bangladesh, it may be Pakistan, but the love that we get when we travel, it's that what we need to, from bottom up, that's what we need to build upon. Then the politicians and others will also have to look to us. So that's what I really hope for.
Thank you, ma'am. Well, on that beautiful note, we'll end today's session. I thank all of you once again for joining us and hope that you will be with us in future again. It was a pleasure to have you.